No one imagined what he would do upon seeing the Apache woman chained up in the market. He was not rich nor poor. His life was simple, filled with routines that gave him comfort. He woke up every morning with the sun, tended to his small garden, fed his few animals, and walked to town only when necessary. On this particular day, the air was crisp and clear, carrying the smells of fresh bread from the bakery and smoke from the blacksmith's forge. The town was coming alive slowly, as merchants began setting up their stalls, calling out their goods to anyone who would listen. Children ran about chasing one another, their laughter echoing against the wooden buildings. Samuel took a deep breath, adjusting the strap of the small satchel on his shoulder, and began walking toward the market. He was thinking about the supplies he needed for the week: some flour, a few vegetables, maybe a new pair of boots if he found the right deal. His mind was focused on mundane matters, the kind of thoughts that made life feel steady and predictable. As he entered the market, the usual noise surrounded him: merchants shouting, coins clinking, and the constant hum of conversation. Samuel nodded politely to a few familiar faces. Old Mrs. Harlan, the baker, gave him a small smile and a wave. The butcher, a burly man with a kind face, called out a cheerful "Morning, Samuel." The market was busy, but not overwhelming, a place where everyone knew each other in passing, where greetings were exchanged without expectation of deeper connection. Samuel liked it this way. He enjoyed watching life unfold around him while remaining just a quiet observer. He wandered slowly from stall to stall, looking at the fresh vegetables and fruits, inspecting the quality of the grains, occasionally stopping to ask the price of something that caught his eye. There was a rhythm to it, a sense of calm that he found soothing. But as he moved deeper into the square, his attention was drawn to something that made his heart tighten and his steps falter. At the center of the market, near a large wooden post that merchants often used to display rare goods or public announcements, stood a young woman. She was chained, her wrists bound with heavy iron cuffs that rattled faintly as she shifted her weight. Her posture was proud, even in restraint, and her dark eyes looked directly at Samuel as if she had been expecting him all along. For a moment, Samuel froze. He had seen many things in his life: hardship, cruelty, injustice, but nothing like this in the heart of his town. The woman was not dressed in the kind of garments worn by the townsfolk. Her clothing was simple yet distinct, and it was clear she did not belong here. The chain around her wrists and the rope at her ankles suggested she had been brought from somewhere far away, somewhere dangerous and unknown. Samuel could see the marks on her skin where the chains had rubbed raw, evidence of the suffering she had endured. Around her, a small crowd of townspeople had gathered. Some were whispering quietly, others laughing or pointing, treating her not as a person but as a curiosity, a display of something exotic or strange. Samuel felt a surge of anger rise within him. He had always believed in fairness, in treating people with respect, even if they were different from him. He had heard stories of people being taken from their homes, of families torn apart, and he had always thought such cruelty existed far away, not here in his town. And yet here it was, right before his eyes. The woman's gaze held something that cut through the noise of the market, a mix of fear, pain, and unbroken spirit. There was a quiet strength in her, a refusal to show despair openly, even though Samuel could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. He began moving closer, weaving through the crowd, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Whispers reached his ears. Some said she had been captured during a conflict with a tribe in the mountains. Others claimed she was being sold for labor, though no one seemed to question whether it was right or wrong. The more he listened, the heavier his chest felt. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, though he had not asked for it. Most of the townspeople were content to observe and gossip, but Samuel knew that standing by quietly would not sit well with his conscience. He had to do something, though he was not yet sure what. The woman shifted slightly, her chains clinking, and for the first time spoke in a voice that was soft yet clear. "Why do you watch me?" she asked, though she was speaking more to herself than to anyone else. The question seemed to hang in the air, reaching Samuel as if it were meant for him alone. He realized that he could not look away. He could not pretend he was just another bystander. Her words, though simple, carried a depth of understanding and a challenge that he could not ignore. Samuel stepped closer, careful not to draw too much attention. He did not want to alarm her or provoke the crowd. He wanted to observe, to understand, to find a way that he could help without causing more danger. As he studied her face, he noticed the small signs of weariness. The way her shoulders drooped slightly under the weight of the chains, the faint bruises on her arms, the dryness of her lips. And yet, there was no surrender in her eyes. She was alert, aware, and in many ways more powerful in spirit than the people laughing at her plight. He remembered his own childhood, the stories his father had told him about fairness and courage, about standing up for what was right even when it seemed impossible. Samuel's father had been a quiet man, much like himself, but he had always emphasized that every person deserved respect, and that cruelty, no matter how common, should never be accepted silently. Samuel had never truly understood the weight of those words until now. Watching the woman chained in the market, he felt the full force of their meaning. Time seemed to stretch as he considered his next move. He could simply walk away, ignore the injustice, and continue with his day as if nothing had happened. That would have been the safe choice. But Samuel knew that he could not. Something inside him shifted, a determination that he had not known he possessed. He would not allow fear or uncertainty to dictate his actions. He had to find a way to help her, even if he did not yet know how. As the market continued to bustle around them, Samuel began quietly observing the layout of the square, the positions of the merchants, the guards, and the paths that led in and out. He noticed small details, the weak spots in the chains, the places where the ropes were frayed, the moments when the guards were distracted by the crowd. His mind began to form plans, possibilities, strategies. He was not yet ready to act, but the seed of determination had been planted. The woman, sensing that someone was paying attention for the right reasons, held his gaze for a long moment. Samuel felt an unexpected connection, a silent understanding that transcended words. They were both aware of the danger, of the difficulty of what lay ahead, but also of the potential for change. In that instant, Samuel realized that life had shifted. Nothing would be the same again, not for him, not for the woman, and perhaps not for the town itself. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting sharp shadows across the market, Samuel made a decision. He would not let this moment pass without action. He would find a way to help her, to challenge the injustice, even if it meant putting himself at risk. The first step had been taken, not with force, but with observation, understanding, and the quiet decision to stand for what was right. The rest, he knew, would be difficult. But for the first time, he felt a fire of courage burning within him, and he knew that nothing could extinguish it. Samuel could not stop thinking about the Apache woman as he walked back home after leaving the market that day. Her face, her eyes, and her quiet strength had burned into his mind. Even the laughter and chatter of the town, which usually blended into a comforting background, seemed hollow and distant now. He remembered the chains around her wrists, the way she had held herself despite the harsh treatment, and the subtle dignity in her every movement. Something inside Samuel stirred, a mix of anger, sadness, and determination. He knew deep down that he could not ignore what he had seen. At home, he paced back and forth, trying to think clearly. He had always been a cautious man, careful not to draw attention, careful to live a life of routine and safety. Yet now, the familiar comfort of his small home felt inadequate. It was as if the walls themselves whispered to him, urging him to take action. He thought about the townspeople, most of whom had walked past her chains as if it were a normal sight. How could people treat another human being this way? How could they laugh and gossip while someone suffered in front of them? These questions gnawed at him, and he realized that the answers mattered little compared to the one thing he could do: help. Samuel spent hours that evening planning quietly. He knew that confronting the guards or the merchants directly would be dangerous. He was only one man, and he lacked the physical strength to overpower several people at once. But Samuel was not reckless. He had always believed that cleverness and careful observation could achieve what brute force could not. He thought back to every detail he had noticed in the market: the weak points in the chains, the distracted moments of the guards, the narrow alleyways that could be used for escape. His mind began piecing together possibilities, strategies, and contingencies. As night fell, Samuel could not sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining the woman chained in the center of the market. He pictured her shifting slightly, her chains rattling, the murmurs of the crowd around her. He thought about the pain she must have felt, the fear that must have lingered even in her proud gaze. And yet, he also imagined her courage, her refusal to surrender. That image stayed with him, filling him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. He realized that helping her was not just about saving someone in need. It was about standing against injustice, about acting when others turned away. The next morning, Samuel returned to the market, this time with a clearer purpose. He moved carefully, avoiding the attention of the merchants and guards. The woman was still there, chained in the same spot, her posture unchanged but her eyes scanning the crowd as if she had learned to measure danger with each passing moment. When her gaze met Samuel's, she gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement that he was the one who might help her. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight of hope and trust that Samuel felt keenly. He began to observe more closely than before. He watched the guards' routines, noting when they became distracted or moved away from her. He noticed the merchants' habits, the times they shouted louder to draw attention away from the woman, the moments they turned their backs for brief periods. Samuel also observed the structure of the chains, the way they were fastened to the wooden post, the small gaps where a tool might be inserted. Every detail mattered, and he committed it all to memory. He knew that preparation was the first step toward action. Samuel also began to consider the woman herself. He could see that she was not just a passive victim. She had a sharp mind, alert to every movement in her surroundings. Her body language suggested she had endured hardship before, that she knew how to survive. Samuel realized that if they were to escape together, they would need to work as a team. He needed her strength as much as she might need his assistance. The thought made him feel less alone in the challenge ahead, and it gave him courage. Over the next few days, Samuel visited the market repeatedly, always at different times, always careful not to draw attention. Each visit brought new observations, new insights into the behavior of the guards and merchants. He began to form a plan, step by step, considering what tools he might need, how he could approach the woman without alarming the crowd, and how they could move through the town streets unnoticed. Samuel's mind became a map of the market, the surrounding alleys and potential escape routes. Every shadow, every hidden corner, every distraction became part of his strategy. Despite the careful planning, doubt and fear often crept in. Samuel was painfully aware of the risks. One wrong move could lead to his capture, punishment, or worse. The merchants were known for their cruelty, and the guards were loyal to them. Samuel thought about the townspeople, who would likely do nothing to help. Yet each time fear rose within him, he remembered the woman's eyes, her courage, and the injustice she faced. That memory pushed him forward. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. One evening, as Samuel sat quietly in his small home, he considered what the woman might be feeling. She had been captured, chained, and displayed in front of a crowd of strangers. She was likely exhausted, hungry, and unsure if anyone would help her. Samuel felt a deep empathy for her, a connection that went beyond words. He realized that action was urgent, not just planning, but the act of helping her escape. He also knew that he needed to gain her trust, to communicate silently and carefully, so that she would understand that he was there to help and not to harm. The following morning, Samuel returned to the market with a small, inconspicuous tool he had found, a key-like object that he hoped could help loosen the chains. He kept it hidden in his pocket, pretending to browse the stalls. He watched the guards and merchants, waiting for the right moment, a moment when distraction and opportunity aligned. He studied the woman's posture, noting how she shifted her weight, how she reacted to movement around her. Every detail mattered. Every observation could be the difference between success and failure. As he waited, Samuel felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, but it was accompanied by focus and determination. He realized that planning alone would not be enough. He needed timing, patience, and understanding of human behavior. He had observed the crowd, the guards, and the merchants, and now he was ready to use that knowledge. He also understood that the woman's strength and courage would be essential. They were not just planning an escape. They were preparing for a carefully coordinated act of liberation, where every small action mattered. The woman, sensing his intent, made a subtle gesture, a tilt of her head, a slight shift of her body toward him. Samuel understood the signal immediately. It was as if they had created a silent communication, built not on words but on observation and trust. He nodded slightly in return, acknowledging that he was ready to act when the moment came. That moment would require courage, quick thinking, and cooperation. Both of them had to be alert, aware, and ready to respond to any unforeseen challenge. For Samuel, those days of observation and planning had changed him. He had gone from a quiet, cautious man to someone aware of his own capacity for courage. He had learned that even in the face of fear, action was possible. He had seen the injustice of the world in the form of the woman chained in the market, and he had decided not to remain passive. That decision, small in appearance but vast in consequence, marked the beginning of a journey that neither he nor the woman would ever forget. By the end of the week, Samuel had everything prepared. His knowledge of the guards' routines, the weak points in the chains, the layout of the streets, and a plan for escape. He also knew that he had gained the woman's trust, even if only in small, silent ways. Both of them were ready for the next step, even though danger lingered at every corner. Samuel understood that courage was not about rushing into the unknown blindly. It was about preparation, patience, and the willingness to act when the time was right. As the sun set on the town that evening, Samuel walked home slowly, thinking about what tomorrow would bring. He felt a mix of fear and hope, understanding that what lay ahead would test every ounce of his courage and resolve. Yet, for the first time in his life, he felt a deep certainty that he was doing what was right. The woman in the market had ignited something within him, a sense of purpose and justice that would not be ignored. He knew that the next day, he would take the first real step toward changing both their lives forever. The following morning, Samuel woke before dawn. The sky was still painted with shades of deep blue and soft purple, and the town lay quiet under the first light of day. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, a tension that tightened his chest and sharpened his senses. Today, he told himself, he would take the first real step toward helping the Apache woman. The planning, observing, and waiting had brought him to this moment, and now it was time to move from thought to action. He dressed carefully, choosing simple, dark clothing that would allow him to blend into the shadows if necessary. He packed a small satchel with items he thought might help. The small tool he had found to manipulate the chains, a piece of cloth to muffle sounds, a loaf of bread, and a flask of water. Each item had been selected with care, each item a small step toward a successful plan. Samuel checked his preparations repeatedly, walking through the steps in his mind like a quiet rehearsal. The town was still asleep, and the streets were empty. This was his opportunity. Samuel made his way to the market, sticking to the edges of the streets and avoiding the main roads where people might be awake early. As he approached the square, he could see the first signs of the day stirring: the baker bringing fresh loaves to his stall, the blacksmith tending the forge, the sound of footsteps echoing lightly in the alleys. But in the center of it all, the woman was already awake, her posture as upright and composed as ever despite the chains that bound her wrists. She had noticed him immediately, and her eyes, full of quiet trust and alertness, met his. Samuel felt a rush of both fear and determination. He nodded slightly to her, a silent confirmation that today he would act. He took a moment to study the positions of the guards. One was leaning against a post, yawning, while another walked slowly among the stalls, clearly distracted by the morning preparations. The merchants were arranging goods, shouting lightly to attract customers. Samuel observed every movement carefully, noting patterns he had seen during his previous visits. Timing, he knew, would be crucial. The wrong moment, a single misstep, and the plan could fail. But he had prepared as much as he could, and now he would rely on both his wits and the woman's strength. He crouched behind a stack of crates, waiting for the right opportunity. Every passing second felt stretched, heavy with tension. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm, focusing on small, measurable actions rather than the overwhelming risk of failure. The tool in his hand felt heavier than it was, each movement deliberate, careful not to draw attention. Samuel's mind raced, reviewing the plan: approach quietly, distract the guards, loosen the chains, and guide the woman through the narrow alleyways he had memorized. Every step had to be precise. Finally, the moment arrived. One of the guards had moved away from his post to check a delivery of goods, leaving the chains momentarily unattended. Samuel moved swiftly but silently, stepping from shadow to shadow. His breathing was slow and controlled, each step measured. He reached the post and crouched low, working quickly to manipulate the locks. The chains resisted at first, but his careful observation and prior practice paid off. Slowly, with patience and steady hands, he managed to loosen one of the cuffs. Meanwhile, the woman watched him closely, her own movements quiet but purposeful. She shifted her weight subtly, preparing to move the moment the chains gave way. Samuel could feel her alertness, her trust, and it strengthened his resolve. He whispered softly, barely audible, almost there. "Stay calm." She nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement. Even in this moment of danger, they shared a connection that went beyond words, an understanding that they were relying on each other completely. The second cuff proved more difficult. Samuel had to adjust his position, hide his hands quickly when the merchant turned toward the square, and then resume his work. His muscles ached from tension, and the sound of his own heartbeat seemed deafening. Yet, he persevered. Every movement was deliberate, every breath controlled. Time seemed to stretch, the world narrowing to the small space between him, the woman, and the chains that bound her. Finally, with one last careful maneuver, the second cuff slipped free. Samuel felt a surge of relief and triumph, but he knew the danger was far from over. The woman rose slowly, her movements cautious but determined. She tested the strength of the chains, then looked at Samuel, a mixture of gratitude and resolve in her eyes. Together, they began to move, stepping lightly through the shadows of the market. Samuel led the way, careful to avoid the patrols he had studied, guiding her toward the narrow alleyways he had memorized during his previous visits. Every turn, every pause was calculated. They moved as quietly as possible, aware that even a single sound could alert the guards. As they approached the first alley, Samuel felt a surge of fear. The streets were still largely empty, but one merchant had started arranging crates near the corner, partially blocking their path. He whispered quickly, Stay close and follow my lead." The woman adjusted her steps, following silently behind him. They slipped past the obstacle, the faint clatter of crates behind them unnoticed by the merchant. Samuel felt a thrill of hope and adrenaline. So far, so good. They were moving toward freedom, one careful step at a time. The alley led to a series of narrow streets, twisting and turning in a way that Samuel had memorized meticulously. He guided the woman, making sure to stay out of sight, checking corners before moving. They passed houses and small shops, some already open for the day, but the early hour and Samuel's caution kept them unnoticed. The woman moved with a grace born of resilience, her alert eyes scanning every sound and shadow. Samuel felt a deep respect for her, realizing that their escape depended not only on his planning but on her courage and awareness. As they continued, they encountered their first real challenge. A guard, late for his patrol, was walking down one of the streets toward them. Samuel froze, pressing the woman against the wall of a building. The guard's footsteps echoed, each step sending a wave of fear through Samuel's chest. He held his breath, praying that they would not be seen. The guard paused briefly, checking the street ahead, then moved on. Samuel exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from his muscles. The woman glanced at him and they shared a silent smile, a moment of triumph and relief amidst the danger. They pressed on, moving through the twisting streets, Samuel's mind alert for any sign of trouble. They had come too far to be stopped now, and the thought of freedom kept them going. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the outskirts of the town, where the buildings thinned and the open countryside stretched before them. Samuel allowed himself a brief moment to look back at the market, now quiet in the morning sun. The chains, the merchants, the guards, they were behind them. They had made it this far, and the world of oppression and cruelty was slipping away. Yet Samuel knew the journey was not over. They still needed a safe place to hide, someone who would offer shelter and protection. He had thought of this during his planning and remembered a kind family on the edge of town who had always shown compassion to those in need. He led the woman toward their home, moving cautiously but with renewed confidence. Every step was lighter now, not because the danger was gone, but because they had faced it together and survived. When they arrived at the small house, Samuel knocked lightly. A kind-faced woman opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight of the two newcomers. Samuel explained briefly, in hushed tones, that they needed shelter and safety. Without hesitation, the woman nodded and ushered them inside, understanding immediately that their lives depended on this moment of kindness. Samuel felt a wave of relief wash over him. The hardest part was over, but the journey toward rebuilding trust, freedom, and life had just begun. Inside the safe house, Samuel and the woman finally allowed themselves to relax. She removed the cloth he had used to cover her wrists, stretching her arms carefully. Samuel offered her the bread and water he had brought, which she accepted with quiet gratitude. They did not speak much, for words seemed unnecessary after the intensity of their escape. Instead, they shared a silent understanding, a connection forged in courage, trust, and survival. That night, as the sun set and darkness enveloped the countryside, Samuel reflected on the day's events. He had faced fear, planned meticulously, and acted with courage, and together they had succeeded. The market, the guards, and the chains were behind them. The woman's strength, resilience, and trust had been essential, and Samuel realized that true courage often came in partnership. They had taken the first step toward freedom, but their journey was far from complete. Yet in this moment, hope burned brightly, lighting a path toward a future they could face together. The first night in the safe house passed with a quiet tension, though Samuel and the Apache woman were no longer under immediate threat. The warmth of the small home, the smell of fresh bread, and the soft light of a lantern brought a sense of relief neither of them had felt in days. Yet, neither of them fully relaxed. Danger still lingered outside the walls, and the town where she had been chained was not far away. Samuel understood that their journey to true safety had only just begun. He sat quietly on a wooden chair, watching her as she tended to her small wounds and bruises. She moved carefully, each motion deliberate, showing the same strength and dignity he had admired from the moment he first saw her. They spoke little at first. Words seemed inadequate after the tension of the past hours. Instead, they exchanged glances that carried understanding and trust. Samuel offered her the food he had brought, and she accepted it gratefully, though her eyes never left his. There was a silent communication between them, built from shared danger and mutual respect. Samuel realized that their connection was growing stronger with every passing moment. She was not just someone he had saved. She was a person of courage and intelligence, someone who had faced unimaginable hardship and refused to give up. The following morning, Samuel awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the window. The world outside seemed peaceful, but he knew it was a fragile peace. The town's authorities would eventually realize she was missing, and the search would begin. They could not stay hidden here for long. He needed a plan for the next stage of their journey. Samuel had spent days preparing mentally, observing routes and thinking through contingencies, but now it was time to act again. They had to move to a safer place, farther from the town, where no one could easily find them. He discussed the plan with her quietly, speaking in low tones to avoid alerting the neighbors. She listened carefully, her eyes sharp and attentive. Though she spoke little English, her understanding was clear. They communicated with gestures, nods, and the few words she could speak. Samuel realized that cooperation and trust would be vital for the next stage of their escape. Each decision had to be mutual, each step calculated, and both of them had to remain alert. They packed lightly, taking only essentials, food, water, and a few belongings that could be carried easily. Every item mattered, but they also had to move quickly and efficiently. The journey out of the town was challenging. They moved through narrow paths and wooded areas, avoiding the main roads where patrols were likely to search. Samuel led carefully, stopping frequently to listen for footsteps or other signs of danger. The woman followed closely, her own awareness helping them avoid potential threats. They crossed small streams, climbed gentle slopes, and navigated the uneven terrain, all while maintaining a low profile. The physical exertion was exhausting, but the sense of purpose kept them going. Every step took them closer to freedom and further from the chains and cruelty of the town. As they traveled, Samuel learned more about her. She told him her name with a soft voice, one he could barely hear over the rustling leaves and flowing water. Her stories were brief, fragments of a life lived in the mountains, of a family she had loved and lost, of a culture and community that had been torn apart by violence. Each story revealed strength and resilience, but also the pain of loss. Samuel listened carefully, offering silent support, understanding that words could not erase the past but could acknowledge it. He realized that their journey was not just about physical escape, it was about survival, healing, and reclaiming dignity. The days passed slowly as they moved further from the town. Samuel kept to a strict routine, travel during the day through less visible areas, rest in hidden spots, and remain alert for any signs of pursuit. The woman adapted quickly, learning from his careful movements, and began to anticipate dangers herself. Their cooperation became seamless, a rhythm of mutual understanding that allowed them to navigate difficult terrain and avoid detection. Samuel felt a growing admiration for her intelligence, courage, and resilience. She was no longer just someone he had saved. She was a partner in survival, equal in skill and determination. Despite the relative safety of the countryside, challenges continued. They faced sudden storms, muddy paths that threatened to slow them down, and the constant worry of being discovered by patrols or townspeople. Samuel remained vigilant, checking every path ahead and ensuring that they had options for escape if needed. The woman, too, proved resourceful, finding hidden routes, identifying safe resting spots, and helping to carry supplies. Together, they faced adversity with courage and creativity. Each obstacle overcame strengthened their bond and confidence. One evening, as they rested near a small creek, Samuel watched the woman carefully wash her hands and face. She paused to look at the water, her reflection mirrored in its surface. Samuel noticed a quiet sadness in her eyes, a reflection of the hardships she had endured. He spoke softly, encouraging her, telling her that they were safe for now and that she had survived more than most could imagine. She nodded, a small smile appearing briefly, a sign of trust and gratitude. In that moment, Samuel felt a deep connection, understanding that courage and resilience were not just about physical survival. They were about hope and the determination to continue, even when the world seemed cruel. As night fell, they set up a small, concealed campsite. Samuel built a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden from view, and they shared a simple meal. The warmth of the fire and the quiet of the night offered a rare moment of comfort. Samuel reflected on how far they had come, from the market square with its chains and guards to the freedom of the open countryside. Yet, he knew that true safety would require more than just escaping the town. They needed a long-term plan, a place where they could rebuild, heal, and live without fear. Over the next few days, Samuel continued to guide them through the wilderness, using his knowledge of the land and careful observation to avoid potential dangers. The woman proved to be a quick learner, picking up cues from the environment, recognizing sounds, and anticipating threats. Their journey became less about fear and more about strategy, problem-solving, and cooperation. Samuel admired her resilience and intelligence, realizing that she had endured hardship far greater than he could have imagined. Their bond deepened with each passing day, built on trust, respect, and shared determination. One morning, as the sun rose over a distant ridge, they encountered a small farmstead. Samuel approached cautiously, signaling the woman to stay back. He explained quietly that they might be able to find temporary shelter, food, and water there. The woman nodded, understanding the plan. Samuel knocked on the door lightly, and a kindly older man opened it. Samuel explained their situation in low tones, careful to convey the urgency and need for secrecy. The man listened intently and agreed to help, providing a small room for them to rest, fresh water, and some simple food. It was a rare moment of relief, a brief respite in a journey filled with tension and uncertainty. Inside the room, Samuel and the woman shared a quiet moment. She finally spoke a few words in her language which Samuel could not fully understand, but the tone conveyed gratitude and trust. He smiled gently, nodding, acknowledging her feelings. For the first time, they allowed themselves to feel a small sense of safety. Yet both understood that their journey was far from over. They had escaped immediate danger, but freedom required more than just avoiding capture. They needed a plan for the future, a place where they could truly rebuild their lives. That night, Samuel lay awake, thinking about the risks they had faced and the obstacles still ahead. He realized that courage was not just about facing immediate danger. It was about perseverance, strategy, and the willingness to act when others would remain passive. The woman had shown him strength and resilience that inspired him, and he knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey had changed both of them, shaping them in ways neither could have anticipated. As they prepared to leave the farmstead the next morning, Samuel felt a renewed sense of determination. The path ahead would be long and uncertain, but they had proven that careful planning, courage, and cooperation could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. The woman moving beside him was no longer simply someone he had rescued. She was a partner, equal in courage and resolve. Together, they would continue towards safety, freedom, and the possibility of a new life. The days that followed were both challenging and hopeful for Samuel and the Apache woman. They had traveled far from the town where she had been chained, yet the journey was not over. Freedom, Samuel realized, was more than just distance from danger. It was the ability to live without fear, to make choices, and to rebuild a life with dignity. Each step they took reminded him of the courage required to achieve this, not just physical courage, but the courage of persistence, patience, and trust. They continued their journey through the countryside, moving cautiously but with increasing confidence. The woman had learned quickly from Samuel's guidance, understanding the subtle signals of danger in the natural world. The snap of a twig, the shadow of a passing figure, the distant sound of a horse's hooves. Her eyes were always alert and her movements precise. Samuel marveled at her resilience. She had endured unimaginable hardship, yet her spirit remained unbroken. Each day, as they traveled together, their bond grew stronger. They shared small meals, quiet conversations, and moments of reflection that deepened their understanding of each other. One morning, as the sun rose over a rolling hillside, Samuel paused to rest. The woman sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked at him with a mix of gratitude and curiosity, and Samuel realized that she had begun to trust him completely. This trust was not given lightly. It had been earned through his careful planning, courage, and unwavering commitment to her safety. Samuel felt a profound sense of responsibility, understanding that their journey was not just about escaping the town, but about ensuring she had the chance for a new life. They reached a small village far from the town, a place where outsiders were rare, and strangers were met with caution but not hostility. Samuel approached the village cautiously, ensuring they were not immediately visible to anyone who might recognize them. He chose a small, quiet home on the edge of the village where the family inside seemed kind and welcoming. Once again, they were offered food, water, and shelter, and Samuel felt a wave of relief. Each act of kindness they encountered reinforced his belief that courage and morality could coexist in a world that often seemed cruel. Over the next few days, Samuel and the woman began to integrate into the village. She was quiet at first, still wary of people after the trauma she had endured, but the warmth of the villagers and the safety of the environment gradually allowed her to relax. Samuel helped her find tasks that gave her a sense of purpose, small chores that allowed her to contribute and regain confidence. She tended to a small garden, helped with cooking, and even taught a few children some of the skills she had learned in her own culture. Slowly, her laughter began to return, a soft sound that filled Samuel with quiet joy. Though their immediate danger had passed, Samuel knew the journey was not over. The town where she had been chained still existed, and there was always the possibility that someone might search for her. They had to remain vigilant, prepared for any eventuality. Samuel spent time teaching her simple survival strategies, ways to remain alert, and how to use her environment wisely. He wanted her to be empowered, not just protected. He understood that true safety came from knowledge, awareness, and the ability to act decisively when needed. During this period, Samuel also reflected on his own transformation. He had always seen himself as a quiet man, someone who observed the world without making waves, but the events of the past weeks had changed him profoundly. He had faced fear, taken risks, and acted with courage when it mattered most. He realized that heroism was not about fame or recognition. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult, even when no one else would. The experience had given him a sense of purpose he had never known, and he understood that he would never be the same again. The Apache woman, too, experienced transformation. She had endured captivity and hardship, yet her spirit had remained resilient. Now, in the safety of the village, she began to reclaim parts of herself that had been suppressed. She shared stories of her homeland, taught the villagers some of her skills, and slowly allowed herself to hope for a future that once seemed impossible. Samuel watched her growth with pride and admiration. He realized that their journey was not just about survival, it was about recovery, dignity, and the ability to shape their own destinies. One day, as they walked through a nearby meadow, Samuel noticed how free she looked, moving with ease and grace, her eyes bright with a mixture of wonder and determination. They spoke little, for words were not necessary to convey their feelings. The bond they had formed through shared danger, mutual trust, and cooperation was unspoken but powerful. Samuel felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that they had achieved something remarkable, not just escaping captivity, but forging a new life together in a world that offered them hope. However, life in the village was not without challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when fear threatened to resurface. Samuel and the woman both had to confront memories of the past, the trauma of what they had endured. But they faced these challenges together, supporting one another with quiet strength. Samuel learned that courage was not only about physical action, it was about emotional resilience, the ability to face the scars of the past while moving forward. The woman, in turn, demonstrated remarkable adaptability, learning to trust and to rely on others once again. As the weeks turned into months, Samuel and the woman began to feel a sense of permanence. They helped the villagers with various tasks, shared their knowledge, and became respected members of the community. The woman's confidence grew, and she began to see a future in which she could live freely, make choices, and pursue her own path. Samuel continued to guide and support her, but he also recognized that she had become her own source of strength. Together, they had transformed from fugitives to individuals capable of shaping their own lives. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink over the hills, Samuel and the woman sat outside, reflecting on their journey. The market square, the chains, the danger, they were memories now, distant but indelible. Samuel spoke softly about the lessons he had learned, courage, empathy, and the importance of taking action when faced with injustice. The woman listened attentively, nodding occasionally, her eyes reflecting both sorrow for the past and hope for the future. They understood that their journey had not only saved them physically, but had reshaped them emotionally and spiritually. The villagers, who had initially been cautious of the newcomers, now accepted them fully. They admired Samuel's courage and resourcefulness, and they respected the woman's resilience and intelligence. She had become a symbol of strength in the village, someone who had survived adversity and now contributed to the community's well-being. Samuel, too, had become more than the quiet observer he once was. He had become a person who acted with courage and integrity, inspiring others by his example. Together, they had created a life built on trust, respect, and hope. Though they had found relative safety and stability, Samuel and the woman never forgot the struggles they had endured. They remembered the chains, the fear, and the moments of danger that had tested them to their limits. But those memories were no longer a source of despair. They were a testament to their courage, resilience, and determination. Each challenge they had faced had strengthened them, teaching them the value of perseverance, planning, and trust. They had learned that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive if one had the courage to act. In time, Samuel and the woman began to plan for a future beyond the village. They dreamed of a life where she could live freely, pursue her own goals, and remain connected to her culture and heritage. Samuel supported her aspirations, recognizing that true courage included empowering others to achieve their potential. Together, they began to envision a life not defined by fear or captivity, but by freedom, dignity, and possibility. Their story became known among the villagers as a tale of courage, trust, and resilience. Samuel and the Apache woman were admired not only for their daring escape, but for their perseverance, intelligence, and compassion. They had faced fear and danger together, and in doing so, had created a new beginning. Their journey illustrated that ordinary people, when faced with injustice, could achieve extraordinary outcomes through careful planning, courage, and cooperation. As Samuel watched the woman tend to a small garden one afternoon, he realized how far they had come. The chains, the market, and the fear were behind them, replaced by freedom, safety, and a sense of hope that neither had believed possible when their journey began. They had both been transformed by the experience, emerging stronger, wiser, and more determined to live meaningful lives. Their story was no longer just about escape. It was about the enduring power of courage, resilience, and human connection. In the quiet of the evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village settled into calm, Samuel and the woman sat side by side, reflecting on their journey. They had faced fear, risk, and uncertainty, but they had emerged not only alive but changed for the better. The Apache woman's spirit had been unbroken, and Samuel's courage had grown beyond what he had ever imagined. Together, they had discovered that even in the face of adversity, hope, determination, and trust could create a path toward freedom and a new beginning.